Brilliant. Hi, everyone. I am twice thankful to Corina because she came all the way from Lancaster,
Not very far.
still, to be external examiner for Muna, who just passed this morning with minor corrections. And then once we had Corina down in London, we convinced her to give a seminar so that we can get an update on her research. Corina used to visit us relatively frequently, or maybe virtually, because she was also very kindly the external examiner for our master program, but that was a few years ago. So it's great to have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Enrico. Lovely. So can you hear me well on the back? This microphone is not for you, so I'll try to project, although it's not my strength. Right. So I'm very delighted to be here and to share with you some of my research. It's not the entire space of my research because I did quite a lot of work on mindfulness as well. But I like to focus today on technologies for affective well-being and mental health. I'm going to try to illustrate it with a range of design exemplars, prototypes that we have built together with my own research group and very rich network of collaborators, because we've been working on a European project which finished about 2 years ago. So this is really a body of work for the last 10 years or so. So just before that, a brief overview. We looked at technologies to support emotional awareness and also emotional regulation. So this ability to control your affective response in an adaptive way. There are a range of strategies of emotional regulation, so I'm going to touch on some of them. And the range of technologies that we are looking at will be pretty much mobile apps, will be smart materials, will also be large displays, and also 3D printing food technologies. So hopefully they will inspire you. So let me start with, this is a good starting point. It's a systematic review of over 130 papers published in the previous 10 years in CKI proceedings on affective health. We look at 3 major conditions: depression, bipolar, and anxiety, and try to really see the space of what's been done with respect to these 3 main conditions. So we found that most of the work has been focusing on data-driven systems, which is very much on the space of personal informatics, very technology-driven, easy to track stuff. But in contrast, far less research is focused on structured interventions. This is computerized CBT, mindfulness, and biofeedback, the 3 main adaptive regulation strategies that people can use. So you can see there is quite a big need to move beyond just mere tracking for a purpose to develop interventions, technology-based interventions. They are massively represented, we think, in the broader picture. We also looked at ethics. So ethics is going to be like a red thread from my entire presentation because it's highly relevant for mental well-being and affective health. So what we looked in this systematic review, we found that actually 2/3 of the papers, these are papers about affective health, mental health conditions, right? 2/3 of the papers do not mention ethics at all, not even institutional approval, right? We're talking about technology built for people living with affective health conditions. Those that do, we look at what kind of ethical principles they are focusing on, and we follow the biomedical ethics framework. There are 4 main principles of ethics: autonomy, respecting the people's voice and freedom of choice, consent; non-maleficence, do not harm through the tech you build; beneficence, do good purposefully, which is not just stop from doing bad; justice, develop systems that everybody can benefit. The cost of building them and the benefits of using them are equally shared. And also, of course, no mention. So these 4 principles, most of the papers deal with autonomy. This is quite easy because, of course, there is this issue of consent that's the way participants are being recruited, and most of these papers deal with people who can give consent. We didn't work, for example, with dementia, or not very few people use children in their studies, so this wasn't a major issue. However, some key ethical concerns have been identified and they are highlighted there. I'm going to briefly touch upon them. First is diagnosis. So some of these systems, because obviously they try to diagnose, to give a diagnostic of depression. This is hugely problematic, very unethical. If you do something like that without the support of a therapeutic alliance, you cannot give to somebody who's just self-helping themselves. With many of these technologies can be just mobile apps on the website. They are open to people who have affective health conditions, but they can use them without being part of a therapeutic process, right? So they don't have a therapist to loosen the blow of receiving a diagnostic of mental health, which is absolutely huge, right? Second, logging personal data can support and improve the accuracy of the diagnosis, but at the same time brings up the issue of data ownership, which is hugely still relevant in this space. We also talk about involving users and capturing their voice and ensuring autonomy, but highly vulnerable people, particularly those who have serious conditions, really can benefit from being screened off to be part of this research, because without particular care handling those cases, these people can actually be harmed by taking part in research like that. And there are some good practices emerging in the recruitment of participants to screen off people with serious conditions. More often, people who are taking part in these studies are people who are not at the acute stage of the conditions. It's very important. And I think that's the case for many chronic conditions research. And finally, there is an abundance of work starting to emerge, now it's even more so, on data publicly available, Twitter, Reddit. There is, however, the risk of de-anonymizing people, even on these data sets. So some good practices are emerging to deal with that, like, for example, paraphrasing the quote. So that issue of consent, for which the data is being put firstly online, should remain, and people are becoming far more aware of handling those such challenges. With respect to affective health technology, we also looked at user acceptance and long-term use. This is important given that many digital health interventions require longer-term use, but people often discontinue use before the treatment has been completed. So this is quite an important topic. So in order to help designers think with a long-term acceptance in mind to design, we developed this toolkit. It's a novel design tool to support this kind of thinking on user acceptance and its evolution across the user journey. So user acceptance, we talk about very early stage before you even start using the tech. That's pre-use, we call it, right? Then you talk about initial acceptance, you start using in the first week, and then you talk about long-term acceptance after a month or even beyond a year. So at each of these stages, different acceptance and acceptability factors come into play. I'm going to show you briefly what the toolkit consists of: 16 design cards, 3 personas, 3 temporal multi-choice scenarios, a virtual think space, a website where the cards can also be freely downloaded. So in order to design the cards, we leverage previous work. We did a scoping review of literature on user acceptance. Again, the literature is vast and many terms are used interchangeably. Acceptance, acceptability, adoption, they are all kind of put together in one basket, and people are using them without really understanding fully how they differ. So this is what we try to do with this systematic scoping review, sorry. So we also built an additional model, as if there weren't enough. This is a technology acceptance life cycle model, where we try to take this temporal lens of see how the term evolves from the pre-use up to long-term adoption. And we identify a set of factors that are relevant for acceptance and adoption. And we design cards. Each card is actually representing one of these factors, and we color them differently to identify health-related, which are in red, individuality, and social context in orange, and technology in blue. And then we run workshops with 21 digital health designers, and findings show that while acceptance is a rather complex construct, by working with the toolkit, it really helped designers articulate, operationalizing this concept, it became more concrete and accessible to them, no pun intended. We found that it's quite challenging for designers to think for the long-term use, because very often we design for a situated interaction. It's here and now in some sense. You don't really think how this is going to evolve in a year time of use, for example, right? So that requires a different mindset, and the paper really unpacks a little bit more that aspect, and how the toolkit can support that, changing that mindset of designing from this macro-temporal perspective. Right, so moving on towards emotional awareness prototypes. We build a range of them, and I said to you earlier, I'm picking a couple of them, which I really hope that can inspire you. I'm calling them design exemplars. Some of them are fully built, some are not so fully developed, some are evaluated in the wild, some are in the lab, so there is a mixture there. But they all articulate some design ideas that I want for you to see and potentially inspire you. Right, affective health wearable system. Let's start with this one. So this is recently, not so long ago published, but the work took place a couple of years ahead. It was a time we used a Philips prototype, a wearable for GSR, which is measuring skin conductance on the wrist. It was at the time before the smartwatch is starting to develop, so that's quite innovative at the time. So that measures skin conductance, so how you sweat, which is a marker of physiological arousal. A marker, of course, you can run, but most likely if you don't run, probably you are emotionally excited, right? And the interface is presenting in color at different moments in time, red if you are high arousal towards more green colors if you have low arousal. So they have a timeline, you can zoom in and out, you can even make some little tags, super important to be able to remember what has happened at the time, but not very rich in that kind of interaction. So what we did with it, we gave it to 3 groups of users, 23 participants who use it for a month. At that time, we're discussing GSR, this kind of awareness of this self-monitoring device as being less familiar, unlike, for example, heart monitors, which people are probably a little bit more aware of. So we call it a proto-practice, a very emerging practice of understanding how things work. And the design, as you can see, it is rather abstract. You can have a timeline, but you don't necessarily know more than different level of arousal and plot it on a timeline. But it doesn't disambiguate far more about what is happening there. We gave it to 3 groups of users, if I remember correctly. One was Ericsson office workers. One was everyday people, large public. I think there were students or PhD students or RAs from the department. I did this work as I was doing my sabbatical at KTH in Stockholm. And the other group were people, I can't remember from the top of my head the other group. There were 3 groups. They were elite athletes. So they were doing performance sport. What we found is that people engage with this device to understand a little bit what's going on with their emotional experiences, and the ambiguity of this initial steps, the ambiguity of this proto-practice of understanding your galvanic skin response was helpful because they weren't sure exactly what they are looking for. Each group was looking for different things. But it's very likely that if you are already working within a specific group, they are looking for something more specific in terms of what they need from that. Like, for example, athletes wanted to improve their performance practice, right? They wanted to be more competitive. They wanted to regulate better emotions before competitions and all that. And that would have benefited for less ambiguity. So there is an interesting tension between ambiguity and less ambiguity that this visualization should capture. This is what this paper in a nutshell unpacked. And then we tried to move away from screen-based displays, where most of the work has taken place, and moved into the space of smart materials. Of course, there is a lot of strong discourse emerging in HCI about smart materials, different type of materials. I did find this kind of thing quite fascinating because they bring forward a different range of constraints and affordances than traditional screen-based displays. And I think by bringing new affordances and constraints, they really make us pause and challenge our assumptions about building these traditional screen-based displays. So it's an interesting detour to make us reflect. So in using smart materials, of course, we connected them with biosensors. We have to do that in order to capture emotions. Could be, again, heart, GSR, galvanic skin response, or heart rate monitors. And we work with both of them. But in addition to the affective sensors, we work with actuators, right? So you need to respond to the emotional response that's being captured through the sensors. So we work with both visual actuators and haptic actuators. So let's try to this is an example where we used a visual type of interface to represent through smart material to represent emotional responses. We use a digital fabrication process. it's really thermochromic paint on top of a electric wire, which gets heated by electricity. You have an insulated material which touches your skin. So then, because of the pattern of the specific heating element, could be like a spiral or could be like a heart shape. This is what we have here. You can, gonna start this. You can, the electricity heats the layer and heats the paint, and the paint changes color. But this change of color, this is a property of thermochromic paints. Of course, you have to pick them carefully what you want to change from the non-actuated to actuated stage. You probably want to change it from more green or blue towards red, not the other way around. This is what the first one is doing. This is changing from more like towards purple and pink. But the interesting thing about this is you can control when they start getting actuated, but you cannot control the deactivation. So there is a sense of inertia, a sense of slowness that emerges here, which is actually quite interesting. And we found that property probably would not have looked into it carefully if you didn't start exploring smart materials, because in the screen-based interfaces, it's all about immediacy and effectiveness, and everything is quick. But this slowness actually proved to prove a very interesting property that we try to unpack. So what we did, we built these and we gave them to not many people, I think about 6 people, to use them for a couple of hours or for a day. And yeah, 6 participants. And what we found, actually this was in the lab. We found that they appreciated the ambiguity. It was quite thought-provoking. And pushed them to start interpret what's happening on the display. The slowness of this kind of, it's almost like a performance, because you see in real time how something changes, right? It's not, the change is also not immediate, it's temporally unfolding. But they would have liked also to control the colors. We choose the colors for them because once you choose a thermochromic paint, you cannot vary that change from actuation to deactivation. But they would have liked to control that, because if they were actually interested to use these displays in public, but they would not necessarily want other people to know how they felt. So they don't want the traditional mapping of high arousal to red, so that there is a sense of conspicuity in the public space. And then we continue developing these prototypes. The first 3 are also visual. On the first line, they are in non-actuated stage. On the bottom row, they are actuated. So that you can see, you can also try to move beyond 2 colors to 3 colors: blue, blue low arousal, red high arousal, green or orange low level of arousal. And here we have haptic representations. We have mini vibration. We also have which vibrate when arousal is high, shape memory alloy, nitinol spring, which gentle squeezes you. It feels like a gentle squeeze on the wrist. Again, your wrist being held when the arousal is high. And we also have flexible conductive fiber generating warmth when you have your high arousal. So we try to leverage metaphors of emotional metaphors through this haptic actuation. And we evaluated them with 12 participants who use them now in the wild, but I think it was just for a day or 2, no more than that, 16 hours. And findings show that they really help people, again, stop, look, try to understand their emotional responses, pay attention to their self in the present moment. It was also very interesting because in emotional research, we talk very often about this discrete model of emotions where you have anger, happiness, frustration, all these kind of things. But we also talk about the bidimensional model of emotion, arousal and violence, Russell circumplex model. So this is a more kind of abstract way to think of emotion. And in everyday life, we think about emotions in discrete terms. And often we don't differentiate that violence and arousal, intensity and positive or negative aspects of emotions can be decoupled. So you can understand emotions in a more profound way rather than just talking about discrete emotions. So although our participants starting their understanding of emotions from a discrete lens, as they progress, even towards halfway through and towards the end of the 16 hours of using it, they start differentiating that intensity, violence, and intensity of arousal and violence are distinct things. And they were experimenting. They try to put, like you usually do, what actually activates? What it become red? Well, I'm moving, or I'm putting it on a. They realized that in time, what actuated was the intensity of emotion, not just the emotion, because they get red if they are excited or if they are angry, right? So that kind of things really made them become far more aware of what's happening. And another interesting thing, going back to the idea of slowness and this temporal unfolding, we show that this is called affective chronometry, how the emotions vary in time, the emotional response. And this is what the displays also help people become more aware. They become more aware of how the emotions arise and how the emotions decay. The decay of the emotional response is very important for self-regulation. All of us can have a spike when we get startled or angry. The point is how long it's taking you to go to a lower heart rate after you get a spike. Just as an athlete gets his heart rate lower after they run. That shows emotional resilience if you do it quicker, right? So that's quite important. We also found that haptic displays are quite hedonic. People like them. There is something about almost like affective touch. They also felt immediate as opposed to visual, right? They also felt almost like a little bit more embodied because, of course, they are on your skin, right? The gradual thermochromic feedback allow people to understand this awareness of the decay time. We couldn't control that, so that took a bit longer time to deactivate, so that it took longer till the colors dissipate, for example, right? But that was quite interesting. So the idea of ambiguity, the idea of slowness, the idea of supporting this affective chronometry came, all of those things, powerful design concepts came from this playing with a smart material. And we also found that people particularly like the 3-color displays more than 2, just for on and off, high arousal, low arousal, because it was more expressive and allowed them better to understand actually what that's emotional intensity and not emotional balance. And then we tried to move on to the next step. We knew that people liked many of these things. They like also to personalize, particularly the color, and said, okay, what can we do now? We had about 6 of these prototypes, many. We broke them up and we created a toolkit. And this is Thermopixel. So this toolkit is really about democratizing the fabrication of digital affective interfaces. We only have here thermochromic paints. We didn't work with haptics at this stage, but on the top left, we have thermochromic sheets and paints. On the top right, we have heating materials, heating pads, nichrome wire, Peltier elements, conductive fabric. We have the GSR sensor on the bottom left, insulation material, and supporting tools like paint brushes, syringes, paint spreader, and all that to apply the paints on materials. And then we gave this to people to build their own affective interfaces, which they did. In a very interesting way. So we had co-design workshops with 20 participants. None of them have previous experience of working with smart materials. We gave them, they were facilitated by our researchers, and each session consisting of 3 main parts. First, we asked them to sketch with using paper and pencil, traditional tools, representations of emotional arousal using non-thermochromic colors, right? Normal colors. Then we introduce them to the kit, and they explore a little bit how the kit works. And then we ask them to build the affective interfaces using the thermokit, the affective interfaces that they have sketched before using normal paper and pencil colors, right? And also, when they were experiencing how to build, we gave them access to their biosensor. So they were using the biosensor, so they could know immediately, if I get my arousal high, I breathe quickly or I move my hand, then the color changes. So they understood in a visceral way how the smart material, how the thermochromic paints operate. Okay, so they build these devices, and then we interview them again, and let me tell you briefly what we got here. So the bottom line is that everybody managed to build their devices, which is quite good. We think that it's quite an interesting way to look at DIY. Many of the toolkit we have to get today just involve mere assembly, where here people were usually using creative design. They were using affective interfaces. They were trying to really personalize them in some way. So there's more than just merely assemble of the toolkit that we gave them. They also use a body in the process of building this because they have to understand how their body itself actuates the devices, right, that they are building. Let me just go to, okay, so a key finding is that there are two groups of interfaces that these people built. One of them were building the interfaces for emotional awareness. So when arousal was high, they used red colors, angular shapes. And the other group was using it for emotional regulation. If the arousal was high, they were using more round shapes and more muted colors, pastel colors, green or blue, for calming down. These two groups, very interestingly, are very gendered. I'll let you think which one is which. So both of these skills are fundamental for emotional well-being, both emotional awareness and emotional regulation, and it shows how different intentions can be applied. Different design purposes can be applied to the toolkit that we gave them. And often, actually, the work in HCI work on emotional awareness doesn't intersect with HCI work on affect regulation. So these kind of things that we did now, we showed that we can merge them together. What else we got here? Okay, by playing with the devices, people clearly could personalize what they have built and get a very deep visual understanding of their affective responses. They also develop attachment to what they have built. Another important thing, most of them would have liked to take and use them after the workshop. They were, of course, flimsy research prototypes. We couldn't give them away, but they were very keen to do that. So it shows the value of supporting this digital fabrication of affective interfaces. Okay, so everything I talked so far covers emotional awareness, but the design of these prototypes didn't particularly target affect regulation. This is the kind of work that we did in the next step. We didn't target explicitly affect regulation. It kind of happened offline after people became aware of how they felt. So let me give you an example of what we built in this space. So I will start with vibrotactile and thermal interfaces. We know that people like this. We found in previous work that they like the haptic aspect because it's hedonic, is pleasurable, is embodied almost. But how can you personalize for it? So we look at two haptic submodalities, vibration and thermal. We use two off-the-shelf devices, two commercial wrist-worn devices. The first one provides precise, localized thermal sensations, top image. The bottom one provides vibrations at the bottom. Each of these have a small space of parameters that people can personalize within. I'm going to give you the example. So for each haptic actuators, you can connect it to a mobile app through which people can explore and change the actuators parameters. People can vary the intensity of the temperature within the range from -11 Celsius degree to +16 from user's baseline temperature. And they could also vary the vibration frequency from 30 to 185 beats per minute, and the vibration intensity between 5 and 100% more than the baseline. So there are two things you can change in terms of vibration, and one thing you can change in terms of thermal, right, the temperature itself. So in the first part, people were given this range of options, not a broad design space, but nevertheless, and they can choose what they would like to receive if they are stressed as a feedback to help them regulate. And in the next part, we had two groups, the haptic group, which received this feedback, and the control group, which did not receive any feedback. Both groups were exposed to a stressor task, a classic stressor task, during which we are measuring their heart rate variability, a hallmark of emotional regulation. And we also give them a subjective measure questionnaire, state and anxiety trait, stress anxiety state questionnaire to measure how they felt before and after. Right, and then we interview them. How did they build the patterns and how did they feel about using the device? Right, the most important finding is that the haptic groups, both submodalities, had significantly lower level of both objective and subjective stress than the control group. That's a very important finding. But now, how did it work? Because actually these submodalities worked in very different ways to support regulation. This is what the qualitative findings show us. So I'm going to very briefly show you what happened here. This is the vibration one. We tried to put them on all the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 participants who took part, put them in terms of the size and the intensity of the vibration they decide to get. So for the vibrotactile patterns, most participants created low frequency vibrations. They went for the lowest possible, 30 beats per minute. They would have liked to choose some of them even lower, but it wasn't possible, and associated them with their heart rate. This low frequency would represent a slow target heart rate. This is exactly what kind of says here, right? It felt slower. It kind of slowed them down, helped them regulate the affect. Only 1% of people choose a little bit higher, but the bulk of them try to use the lowest possible vibration frequency. For the temperature, we almost have two different groups. Some people choose warm, not hot, warm. Again, think about affective touch almost. But others also choose lower temperature, lower than the baseline, but not very cold. And if you think about, there is a rich literature in linguistics about metaphors. If you are cool, right? You are cool. You can regulate yourself. And for warmth, it's something more about feeling comfort, right? Both of these two things kind of support regulation in a very hedonic way, and resembling almost like comforting and human touch. They stay away from heat. Heat is not good for regulation, but warm and a little bit of coolness seems to work well for different people. So strong individual differences in the preference for the thermal biofeedback. So what did you find? As I said, they do work differently. So there is a sense of designing for implicit self-regulation. Implicit, so you don't really think about it. It comes naturally to you, right? But the two haptic modalities work in different ways. The vibration works by entrainment. You synchronize your heart rate with that of the target shown by the display, right? And entrainment has been shown in many ways of self-regulation. The infant and the mother breathes slowly and the child learns to regulate SUS by mirroring and synchronizing with mother's heartbeat and breathing patterns. So that's very important. It happens every day. You might not be aware. Pay attention. Close friendships, romantic relationships, people synchronize the way we breathe, the way our heart rate are synchronized in therapists and clients. When there is rapport, there is a sense of synchronization of the bodily rhythms, very powerful way of co-regulation. Right, so entrainment is important. You don't co-regulate with somebody else, you co-regulate with the device, right? For the thermal, it doesn't work through entrainment. The thermal works through the hedonic qualities of the heat, of the warmth, right? That's a kind of very comforting thing. So these are hedonic qualities. And of course, we had two modalities, each of them supported in different ways. And we were thinking, well, that's interesting. Can we do something that merge them together and bring the benefit of hedonics that comes from thermal into the entrainment? And we can do that, actually. You can have temperature which pulsates at a rhythm. So you get the entrainment quality with the hedonic quality of warmth or cool, right? So that's quite interesting. Plus, we also found that people would have liked this to be personalized because you only had one pattern throughout the entire stressor task. But the stress during the stressor task actually varies. So would have liked to have different level of feedback to mirror their level. So having it connected with the biosensors to adapt the response actually could be quite a powerful way to improve these devices. Right, so now moving on to another step. Let me see how far, okay, quickly. Food, I love food. I think food is a beautiful resource for design. And I had the pleasure to collaborate with a design studio in Cambridge, which built a 3D food printer. And we did quite a lot of fascinating research here. So I'm going to touch a little bit on them. So this is a systematic review of human food interaction literature, looking at eating experiences, particularly eating experiences, because there is a little bit more in this space than just eating experiences. But we want to see the role of the body. And the research space is fascinating. I'm not going to insist now. This is just between brackets. But I'll tell you two things which are quite important. The mouth and the gut are two emerging sites for interaction, which with the development of digestive sensors, I think are going to bring up amazing opportunities for creative work if you are interested to step into that space. I think it's fascinating. Food is pleasure. Food helps us regulate emotions for better or worse. food is very embodied. So I think what's not to like? So I think it's excellent things, excellent resource for design. So we're trying to see how we can support some work in my space, affective, emotional well-being, affect regulation. This is just a very initial step we did in order to sensitize people towards the food experiences and to bring them in the space of emotions. We build these sensory food probes. We leveraged the previous systematic review. We gave them for a week. This is a kind of a toolkit we gave them. These are things which allow people to augment or to, what's the other word? Not augment. Sensory augmentation, sensory, yeah, the other. Deprivation, yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, so you can have blindfold, you can have a nose clip, you cannot, so you remember when you go in a restaurant, you don't see, but you can just feel the flavor. That's a kind of thing. So we gave them those, we gave them a food diary, a body map to complete, and also a board game we can play together. The idea is that you have some representation of basic taste with different colors and shapes, so they can pick specific food they have, but they don't tell to each other what it is, and they try to play the board game to kind of guess each other. So it's again sensitizing towards food experiences. So we gave them that, enough sensitizing, then what happened? Then we co-design, we work with 5 couples, and we try to co-design flavors that they can use in the romantic relationship to where positive emotions, to where neutral, and to where to co-regulate when somebody is upset or somebody is stressed, so sadness and anxiety. Okay, they generated all kinds of flavors. We built them, and then we gave them to them together with a 3D printed food, and they use it in their house for, I don't know, a couple of days or a week. I can't remember the, yeah, 1 week, right. You can see what they build. Not surprisingly, they use a lot of chocolate for cheering somebody up, cakes. They use also drinks, warm drinks for calming. For sadness, you can see bland chili sauce. So we have all these things, and I put them in the printer, and they give each other this. The 3D printer doesn't print a meal. It prints a little treat, right? It's a very different type of experience. So, let me tell you what we got from here. The 3D printed flavors supported expressiveness, physicality, joint action, and gift giving, which are really the main things you have in remote connectedness, technologically mediated connectedness. In terms of regulation, the most used were like 3D printed chocolate-based flavors. For calming down, they use more like drinks such as juices and teas. And people starting using this 3D printer for 2 end of day rituals. The evening meal and the end of day, right, when people connect. And we really discuss the value of how people can extend the value of 3D printed food for the co-regulation in everyday life. This is really the cornerstone of what you've done. Very briefly, I'm going to tell you, we did something similar with the same 3D printed food, but we work with elderly people trying to support their sense of identity. And we call them, there's a literature in memory research. I'm quite into memory research. We look at self-defining memories. These are very powerful memories which are core to our sense of identity. They are memories which... Well, in a nutshell, I can tell you what was really powerful here, that 78% of memories prompted by the flavor-based cues were recalled with a strong sense of travel back in time. This is called recollective retrieval. This is according with the recollective retrieval theory, is that the hallmark of the memory not being just semantic, but experiential. So you really travel back and you feel it. Again, very powerful finding. So we discussed the value of 3D printed food as a flexible resource to design for memory technologies, novel recreational reminiscing technologies, but also therapeutic multisensory reminiscing, because many of these people, they didn't have dementia, but they can see how they can be used in people with dementia. Okay, depression apps. We did several reviews of their functionalities. Interesting findings that most of them support multiple therapeutic approaches, but the evidence-informed interventions are not so many, and there is a strong need for their clinical validity and safety. That became like the hallmark of this research. Besides from looking at their functionalities, we also look at user reviews of these apps. This brought up additional concerns. The idea of misdiagnosis, which I mentioned at the beginning, is still there, right? So many apps try to deliver diagnostic, very, very harmful. There is also quite a lot of challenges related to peer support, unqualified peer support, which again can be harmful. This was absolutely surprising to be so strong in users' reviews. And major usability issues. Again, it's not particularly shaking my boat, this finding, but the fact that we live in a time when we design for UX, but the basic usability of apps built for people with mental health, people who are vulnerable, I think it's appalling in some way. But of course, these people have benefit from these apps without paying from them. So there is always this kind of very complex, how can we build better apps when people benefit from them in a way they do it? They give their data away and all that. So very interesting space, I think, and regulators should really get their step in. This is an example of a smartwatch app that we built. It's about self-monitoring that is often encouraged by the therapist for helping people tracking their mood and identifying patterns. And we moved traditionally from paper-based, like mood diaries and all that, to mobile apps with additional challenges remaining. We did a lot of ecological momentary assessment, right? How you feel right now, you track your mood through an emoticon or whatever. But it's challenging, it's demanding, still strengthen the stigma people feel. So we're thinking, can you use smartwatch for that? So the idea is to really leverage this kind of immediate proximity of a smartwatch and make it more discreet, more immediate interaction, private as well, but also with less burden to the user. So this is a partnership with SilverCloud and 15 NHS clinicians. The smartwatch app was built in collaboration with them and was actually integrated into the SilverCloud platform, so people could access digital therapy program. SilverCloud is a big platform for mental health, if you're not familiar with. The smartwatch automatically connects sleep and physical activity data, so people do not have to enter them, reducing the burden, but they are required to enter their mood. So through ecological monetary assessment, just using the emoticon of the wearer. They also asked to kind of reflect on the factors which might affecting their mood, and also representing summaries of mood, sleep, and physical activity, again, over the past week, again, to support that kind of a little bit more reflection as well. The most important thing is, okay, so the study was running. We aim to explore patient acceptance of this technology during a routine digital therapy, and you define the user acceptance according with the technology acceptance lifecycle model: pre-use, day 0, initial use 3 weeks, sustained use 8 weeks. The study took 8 weeks. And we had the control group which didn't use the smartwatch, and the experimental group which used it. And we have an acceptance questionnaire given at different times within the study, and we use additional demographics and exploratory questions interview at the end to understand the entire interaction with the app and what has happened there. So the main key finding is that the acceptance scores remained over 70% throughout the 8-week study, which is really good. And there will be far more details in the paper, which I'm not going to insist now. And we also highlighted a couple of design principles of how to design guidelines for designing self-monitoring interventions on smartwatch to be accepted and used on the long term, right? It's something about the self-compassion towards the self-reported data, support, again, lowering the stigma, because the stigma can still be there, not as much as a smartwatch, but it's still there. And there is a sense of balancing the demands placed on users with the support for self-assessment, self-awareness. Of course, if you enter your data, you become more self-aware, but the more demand is on your time. Okay, and this is my very last one, world-size display for dementia care. Here we work with a residential care home And we try to move away from the screen-based, like tablets, that the clinical staff or the residential care staff works with people with dementia, trying to give them, well, this is your profile. I'm going to remind you for some little questions to scaffold your memories of who you are. So can you move away from this screen-based display of their personal stories? This is what's the common support for memory in residential care. So we build this large display. It's almost like an immersive experience. There are 9 large displays placed in an L shape. And this was placed in this care home. There are only women, most of them advanced dementia. And the content displayed there was curated by the staff in response to people's moods in the room. So most of them, as you can see, they were like nature. They were music. They were reminiscing sessions where they were presenting, for example, how the people living lives in after war, because that was the time of the use of these ladies. Well, this was a residential care home for ladies. And what we found was the use of the display actually increased as the time went by, remained consistently high, over 8 hours per day for the entire year. It became integrated in the fabric of the residential home life to such an extent that although it was an expensive display, about over 20K this display, we couldn't take it off at the end of the time. It would have been unethical. So we left it there trying to see if we can find alternative ways to use camera. We didn't. I think it's still there. So very powerful. So what happened? The care staff used this different content, and we found that actually they developed 4 new social psychological interventions. I'm going to highlight 2 of them here. One was mediated stage experiences for sensory and social stimulation. So very important, this kind of sensory stimulation. Elderly people need additional stimulation because their sensory thresholds are getting lower, right? So they need, higher, so they need more to experience. And they were mobile for various reasons. They couldn't leave the house. So bringing the world to them was one way to do it. And these things, because almost like immersive, allow them to kind of feel it. So this was a picture of the local church with a mass being shown in real time, that they can almost feel like this being part of. They were watching movies together, even with their family members, giving them almost like a silent, co-shared experience where both of them can enjoy each other's presence without necessarily supporting reminiscing, which is quite draining for the family members caring for the loved ones. But this was probably one of the most important, and why I put in this topic, is about emotional regulation, is about nature-inspired media for mood and behavior. So with dementia, there is a lot of agitation, particularly towards the end of the day. And these big landscapes of soothing, beach, water, sound, were really powerful. And you can see this is a very powerful quote. With severe dementia, there is a lot of walking, so one resident almost exhausts herself. But with the right image, she would relax almost instantaneously. Shoulders would drop and she would sit and look at the screen. And they said this can be for 10 minutes, but it's 10 minutes that she would not have had otherwise. So there's quite a powerful outcome supporting the regulation through curated content by the staff, residential staff members. Okay, I'm stopping here because the time is short and I'm happy to take questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can go ahead. Thank you, Corina. That was
All out. Battery. The summer break needed more time to charge.
the secret question. Thank you so much. That was a great talk and a great journey through all of those pieces of work. Very interesting. I mean, you have a lot of work that's sort of tried to consolidate stuff that has been done in this space. Like, for example, the last one you had was these apps where there's so many issues with them being out there. But like, it's a typing, right? How do you think that we could have more, like all of us, but have more impact in terms of, because we're doing this kind of research, but are we making a dent in the app space really, or Yeah, how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are couple of layers there. I think we are looking at app because they are massively used. Since they are massively used, I do believe there are design principles that are embedded tacitly in them that we might not be aware of. They are probably much used than academic apps. So one is to articulate the design knowledge. Now, how we interact with the commercial apps, that's a different conversation. I think there is a space for platform research here, but longer term platform, and really engaging with the developers, and I think also with the policymakers. I think that's absolutely critical. And probably for that, we need more evidence of the harmful, and some of the more systematic reviews of the use of the apps and the challenges that have emerged. Some of them taking place in states. But I think we need more surveys of that. Actually, we do have a survey with UCLIC, but didn't publish, so it's not really presented yet. Yeah, I think we need more evidence and working with policymakers. The other strand, which I always had in mind, I'm very interested in money, in financial well-being, and all the commercial apps. What's the business model behind them? There is all about many people in mental health space, particularly most of research is done in the UK. So we do work with UK platforms. There is a profound assumption that many users have that access to mental health care should be free. And this comes into the space of apps. But these apps are built by developers, young people. So this kind of the business model, I think the transparency of the business model and what's happening with the data, that has to be far more public awareness. And you get what you put in. And you think you get free care, but do you get free care because all your data has been sold? So I think this to me is the most interesting, because I think that's the underpinning thing for what we have. Developers are under a lot of pressure to release versions all the time, and that's why they are buggy.
Yeah.
So it's becoming almost like an ecosystem, social technical ecosystem. It's not just an app. Yeah. So I think it would be a fascinating research to take place, but I think we need key players and a big grant.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. I wanted to ask about the last study that you presented in the care home setting. I'm interested in the role of the care home staff as co-designers, I assume, and how the journey for the technology adoption unfolded. Were they excited from the beginning, the care home staff, and also the sort of longitudinal aspects as the technology was left there, which is, I think, a significant, that shows the levels of engagement and the desire to have the technology there from the user's perspective. So was it initially in the wild kind of longitudinal study, or did it become that later?
No, it emerged, and I think we've been very flexible to let it go as it organically emerged. We wanted initially to co-design with them in a more traditional co-design, but then we realized they are there all the time, and often the interventions would have been provided here and now because they were feeling the pulse of the room. And whatever they would, if people were like, they wanted to do an activity and everybody was quite subdued, they were putting something more rhythmic music, Android or something, and rhythm, and people were starting getting more. I mean, you do that with music, but with displays also, because they could see dancing and they could see something like that. So we could not have been part of that. We did interviews several times during the project, but we weren't there every day. So it really became 100% driven by the care staff. They were creating the content. And we make in the paper method very clear that we change into more like participatory. It wasn't so much co-design, it wasn't research driven, it was driven by the people in the house. Now looking at what they're thinking, we also had a very strong champion. One of the owners of the house, they were championing the technology, and this was also very important. And I think as family members, because they were also seeing the benefits it has on the residents. The residents themselves were all the time observed and monitored. This was a private house. It wasn't a cheap house to be in. And the family were visiting their loved ones very, very frequently. All these things came together to see that there was benefit in the displays. And tangible benefits and sustained benefits. And this is very different than what you have from public display literature, because public displays usually are not used extensively. There is the honeypot effect. Everybody's saying that, and there is what novelty wears off, but this is not the case. It's just quite unique, and I think it's because they were put there to solve an issue. They weren't there just to explore how they can be solved. It's successfully trying to address the challenge, and consistently did so. I think that's the key. Yeah, the method very well described that, how the people were engaged.
Thank you.
Your turn for revenge.
Oh, I'm taking.
This is about your future. I don't know if you're familiar with health. Yeah, and we keep getting those ads about using the service, which is an online therapy platform, but it's not only virtual therapy, but also it's like an application you can go to. Looking at different therapists and then matching yourself with them. And you mentioned earlier the ethical issues with mental health issues. I don't know how like in such applications you show your face, you share very intimate about health and then you can just immediately switch to someone else. It's not like a regular therapy where you stay with one person for an extended period of time. The easiness of such platforms actually where we think more like such platforms. How would the ethical issues would be in such platforms, and whether you consider about exploring that area of the future?
So there are a couple of things in what you're mentioning. We didn't look particularly only to what you're talking about is internet-based therapy. It's face-to-face delivered online. Most of the apps do not focus exclusively on that. Most of the apps provide access to digital therapy with modules that people go and rather than do their homeworks on paper, they do it like CBT, computerized CBT. It's not just with the therapist, talk therapy, and the person is not in the room, but it's on the other side of the screen. This is what you're referring to. That is powerful. It could be something that complements the homework that people do through different modules of digital therapy. This is really where the strengths of these apps are, because actually the fact that mobile apps gives you access to a therapist, I think it's oversold. The point is we don't have enough therapists to provide that in person or online. That the apps do not solve the problem of the shortage of the therapists. They just give it to you close to you because you can't travel to them. But the biggest problem is you don't have them. So they have to be supported by digital and more self-help, that's why those tools are there, that people can do the homework with some checkpoints, but not a lot of self-talk therapy involved. But I think that's important, without a doubt. It's part of many components, and actually many of the apps do provide access to accessing to, for example, information to access therapists, particularly the symptoms which people report are getting quite serious. Definitely, there are always kind of this most serious apps will have disclaimer. For suicidal ideation, you should contact them. People should not struggle alone. The ethical issues of changing the apps, changing the therapist. It's interesting. I don't know if necessarily an app problem. I mean, in everyday life, even without the technology, I think you have to try till you connect with the therapist. You might not get the person that you have a rapport with immediately. You might have to check a couple of therapists, so maybe that's a good thing. So I don't really answer your question, but I don't think I got the challenge that you're asking better than what I already communicated. So if there are other layers, we can unpack it offline.
As you were talking through and thinking about these different apps, starting from the early ones to measuring sweat, it struck me that the current craze is the Zoe app. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Zoe had this what diabetes is
Oh,
based
right.
on for the insulin, where you can, after you eat something, it will show you the spike in your insulin. And so it's becoming more invasive, and it's a big craze. Lots of people are spending £500 a year just to see what's happening in their stomach after they've eaten something. And I wondered whether, you know, as these technologies become affordable, so there's also a camera you can swallow that shows you what's happening in your stomach. What do you think the ethical issues are with these more invasive, more intrusive types of apps that tell you something that perhaps we may not necessarily need to know? We know that we should have help.
Oh, it's very interesting. Actually, I think it's a fascinating space. So we had something, we look at something like that, but for mindfulness purpose, and we start to discuss from the lens of interoception. So it's first internal senses. External sensors, like, you know, what you see, especially audio visual, it's all external senses, but internal senses, like, you know, your heart rate variability, powerful interoception, how you regulate your heart rate after your heart spikes because your heart rate spikes because you got scared or something, right? Again, how that can be lowered. That's a form of interoception. We are not aware of heart rate very much, but we can train to become. The more aware we are, the better we are of self-regulating, which is hugely important for well-being, right? Affective health is fundamentally an issue of dysregulation. Very powerful thing, an issue of dysregulation. So I love interoception. We were trying to put some, again, haptic, thermal, and vibration, we call it whole mind, just to give you a feeling of how your mindful space during meditation, you become mindful of mind wandering, and give you this feedback. Again, people perceive it as coming from inside. So almost like an interoception, although it's all placed on the skin. We have some thermal haptics, thermal actuators here. I love interoception. I think for that, I'm not saying it's not without ethical challenges. My father had diabetes, and I know that he had to very invasively bring his skin.
Good reason for people who've got diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is being used now by healthy people.
Okay, that's
So
interesting.
and it's like, well, what's next? So there's going to be something that can measure irregular heartbeats.
Yeah.
And so people, it might make people more worried, more.
Yeah.
The more
You are right, absolutely right, absolutely right. That's an issue, and we know that from the research we did on depression apps. Actually, there is very harmful effect of recording your mood consistently, because if you are depressed, your mood is always going to be bad, and the more you see of that, the worse it gets. So how the data that is summarized is shown has to be done extremely sensitively, because this can push some people from edge to jump. It's a really, really huge issue. We found that, and it was very disconcerting. And also, people sharing their negative experiences, there are all kind of spaces where people share a lot of black thoughts, and other people consuming this negative content, which again is like a vicious circle. Ethical issues absolutely through the roof. I got petrified seeing what's happening. Yeah, you're right. So I think a lot of discernment is given to how you protect already those who are. Yeah.
But this is a really interesting conversation, because I think isn't this a sign of how the health space is changing, because we're moving away from more and more treatment to prevention, because you just can't get a healthcare provider. So a lot of people are trying to self-monitor rather than get into a treatment space, because it just that's just so difficult. So,
but if you're discovering something which might be problematic, how can you do it in a safe space without leaving people without?
exactly, yeah, indeed, you have to deal with the current context, because it's changed so quickly, and it's.
And if you look for many things, you might find something that you're not prepared yet to see. Yeah, you're right. That's very important.
To build on that, I guess that's sort of there's two design spaces there. There's people who might have health conditions, they want to either prevent those health conditions or cure them. But I think we're one sort of speaking to people who might have a form of hypochondria, that they're very scared of having health conditions and they want to control it, the visibility of that as much as possible, to the point that almost becomes an issue in itself. So that would be quite an interesting space of that, like designing for hypochondria and acceptance of not being able to control.
Absolutely.
It at all times.
But many enthusiasts, quantify self users are just They're just collecting data. They don't have a specific purpose, and at some point they might be hit by what they find. Yeah, I mean, there is not a specific reason to, there is almost data fetishism. I get the data, I want all the data there, but not necessarily with I want to get better, I want to monitor condition, I want to improve the condition management. Those rationales are not there, but you're right, that still makes them vulnerable of finding something that they are not prepared to handle. They're not equipped to handle well by themselves. Okay, our ways is the time, what do you think?
Bit over, but it was a very fascinating discussion.
I think it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much again.